What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Come On, Son. This is your host, Aubyn, and we are here tonight gathered with some of my favorite people, not only in the world, but especially in the wrestling world. So I have with me tonight Brian Bond, Dr. Lowery Woodall, and Dr. Cyril Pickering. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. We will I'm so glad to have you here. We will do your introductions after the video. We're going to start with our theme song that we'd like to start off with. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And we're back. All right, let's do this thing. Gentlemen, let's go ahead and introduce yourselves to our wonderful audience. We'll start at I suppose this is the left, right on my screen. I don't know what's going on. We'll start with Brian, and we'll just go clockwise. So Brian, Lowery, and then Cyril, and then we'll get this thing cracking.
All right. Yeah, my name is Brian Bond, as you can see. I'm an actor, director, playwright, and future educator of theater arts, and also massive wrestling fan. Have been since pretty much I was a toddler. So yeah.
So that was only like 6 years ago, Brian. I mean, we know you just graduated college, but like
Yeah.
toddler years weren't that far away. Thanks, Brian, for coming. Brian, real quick, and as gentlemen, as we do your introductions, I'm going to throw a loophole in here real quick. Tell us your favorite wrestler of all time. You don't need to explain it. We'll get there eventually, but just your favorite wrestler of all time. Brian, go.
Eddie Guerrero.
Great answer.
So I am a associate professor over at Millersville University. I'm the chair of the communication and theater department over there. Very big wrestling fan. I'm also the president of the Professional Wrestling Studies Association, which is an international group of scholars who look at the ways that professional wrestling has impacted society. And we have a free conference, online conference that's held every April, usually on or about WrestleMania weekend. Have an online journal that you can submit to. Love to have more people involved in that. So please, if you're interested, feel free to look us up online, PWSA, the Pro Wrestling Studies Association, and think about being involved, submitting some stuff to us, and being a part of what we do.
And also an author as well of your book. You want to plug your book real quick. Mark, listen, let's get these viewers listening and buying, man.
That's true. I did write and publish a book on the history of WWE and its relationship to race and gender and sexuality. And that's through Roman and Littlefield. So you can go and find me on Amazon. I apologize now for the price of the book. It is an academic textbook first, and so it has an academic book price to it. But there's a Kindle version that's a little bit cheaper, so consider.
Lowery, are you getting a chance to use that book in class, or is it only?
Not in class, no.
Gotcha.
I've taught a professional wrestling course at Millersville several years ago. It's like 2014, maybe 2013, something like that.
I just missed it because that's when I was there and then left. So it's right as soon as I left.
But that was years before I wrote the book,
Sure.
or anything like that. So yeah, I didn't use unless I teach the class again. I doubt that I'll use it. And even if I did, I don't know. I feel a little weird about using my own book.
I get that. We've all been there.
But But I'd love to teach class again. It was a lot of fun. We had a lot of guests come in for it. Diamond Dallas Page came in for the class, and Ted DiBiase. Trying to think, Eve Torres came in for that class. Several other people. It was a lot of fun. And before I forget, Shawn Michaels.
Another great answer.
Question.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm glad to be here. My name is Cyril Pickering. I am a school psychologist in the Washington, D.C. area. Grew up a massive wrestling fan from the early 90s. So I saw the transition into the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars. And it was a good time to be a young person. I can remember distinctly going to school during middle school. I'd watch Monday Night Raw. My best friend watched Nitro. And we would share results with each other. So yeah, that's and I took a bit of a break from wrestling for a while. I think I mentioned to somebody, once you're in college, going down to the common area and a bra and panties match pops up, that's probably not going to earn you a lot of popularity. So I kind of stepped away and would keep up with things, and then got brought back, ironically, or incidentally, a few years ago, when it was around the time that Roman Reigns had to take his hiatus for cancer, and then the big Becky Lynch angle when she got her face broken by Nia Jax, and she was actually the one that brought me back into it, because the shows were brutal around that time, but that was like the most interesting thing to me. And now is a very interesting time to be a wrestling fan in the modern times. My favorite wrestler, I'm a bit more probably around Lowery's time. The best there is, the best there was, the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Bret the Hitman Hart. That's is and always will be my favorite.
All right. And I'll throw mine in there too. I've waffled so many times, but favorite, I'm going to go with Jeff Hardy. Just watching him do his thing in his heyday and his prime was just a thing of beauty. So many times I want to say Rey Mysterio. A lot of times I want to say Shawn Michaels. But at the end of the day, Jeff Hardy was my favorite to watch when he was in the WWE and healthy and, doing his thing. Some of the greatest matches, tag team matches that you'll ever see, the Hardy Boys were involved in. So just very exciting to be a part of. So let's kick this thing off. So we are here tonight to talk about the 10 best wrestlers, both male and female, of all time. This prompt came up on Twitter, and it was created by Chat GPT. So shout out to the AI for creating both of these lists. We're going to see how AI has done. We are going to look at the ranking. Nobody on this panel has seen the rankings except for myself. So we are going to dissect the ranking, see if we want to change anything. We want to move people around. We'll debate why people do belong or don't belong. And then we'll just see if we can come to a consensus with the top 10 best wrestlers of all time, whatever that means to you. If you can justify it and you can convince us, we'll move things around, and we will see if we can create our own top 10 and have you, the viewers and listeners, compare ChatGPT's ranking versus our ranking and just see who you like better. And so without further ado, it is time to get this thing started. Let's get it cracking. Let's bring it up here. Top 10 best male wrestlers of all time. I'll read the list before we get started. We start at number 1, the Hulkamaniac himself, Hulk Hogan. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Number 3, The Rock. Number 4, Ric Flair. Number 5, John Cena. Number 6, Shawn Michaels. Number 7, Andre the Giant. Number 8, Bret Hitman Hart. Number 9, The Undertaker. And number 10, Triple H. Gentlemen, do you have any problems with these rankings?
I guess the immediate question that comes up is, are we talking only WWE or outside of that? Because we're only talking WWE, like not WCW even. Ric Flair's not up there. So I think that's something to clarify, I guess, how we're doing this.
I think we're looking historically at what becomes WWE.
Okay.
Because, we look at, Andre the Giant in the regional territories is where he made most of his name before coming in. So I think we just got to look at the wrestling landscape as a whole, and focus primarily on their work in what becomes Vincent Kennedy McMahon Jr.'s WWE eventually. So we'll count everything WCW, WWF, whatever we want, AWA, if you want to throw that in there, whatever you can find. So,
yeah, I mean, when I was making the list, I was assuming it was only WWE. I don't know, maybe I just misread, like when you sent me your text message.
Yeah,
maybe I misread that, and so that was kind of my impression going in. But even with that being the case, I think one of the difficult parts of this is, what do you use to create that list, right? I mean, if it's in-ring work, if it's historical importance,
sure.
if it's drew the most money, if it's drew the most money, then that
most of these people won't not be on here.
Is pretty accurate.
Yeah.
You need to move 4 and 5. Well, I mean, Flair didn't draw nearly the kind of money that the Rock or Austin or Hogan did, sadly. But I mean, if we're talking about it from that standpoint, then I understand where they're coming from. I can tell you that my list does not look a lot like that. But I think I was using different, criteria to think of this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I intentionally included a couple of non-WWE names and non-American names just to be a little bit of a pot stirrer.
Sure.
And so, my name leaves off some very prominent names, a couple who are on this list, because there's modern times, wrestling is often more influenced by the international wrestling scene than even the Attitude Era or Ruthless Aggression era WWE. So I wanted to have a nod towards that. But yeah, the question is right. Are we considering the wrestler as sports entertainer, which I should, or just pure wrestling ability, in which case number one's got to change. I did my best to ignore kind of out of the ring personal stuff, but
that does have to at some point it's going to factor in somewhere. So let's do it like this. Let's start here. Let's look at this top 10 as presently constructed. Is there anyone that you feel should be removed from the top 10? Let's start there. We'll worry about ranking our top 10 once we figure out who we want to take off, who we want to add in, and then we'll figure out if we can come up. So is there any objections to anyone out of this top 10 for anyone here? For whatever parameters you'd like, we'll talk about it, we'll vote on it, we'll call it a day, we'll see what happens.
I mean, it's tough to say that I would necessarily take anyone off, because I can make a case for everybody that's on here being there. I will say that I think there are probably better choices than Triple H to be left on that top 10 list. But depending on what way we're organizing this or thinking about or classifying it, it becomes hard for me to take anyone else off. I mean, Triple H didn't draw the most money. I don't think he's the best from a technical standpoint. Above average talker. And obviously, I mean, he's been he's arguably more important from
godsend to the current WWE.
Yeah, I mean, you know, if we're just talking about like his historical significance, I mean, outside of, you know, maybe one or two people here, he's arguably the most important person on this list. But if I'm thinking about just his wrestling career and not what he's done for the company outside of that, I don't know he's a top 10 guy for me.
All right, let's take a vote. Brian, Cyril, do we agree? Do we not agree? Does
Yeah, my
Triple H
list didn't
stay?
have Triple H on it. I think, you know, great heel, great, you know, sort of personality. He and had a lot of really great, you know, feuds along the way. I think after for a few phases of his career, you have the infamous Reign of Terror. You have the whole authority angle. I think he was probably overly centralized, you know, at the, you know, it hurt the business in a lot of ways. You know, I think he has an understanding of the wrestling business that, you know, probably few in the business have right now. So I'm not, you know, knocking any of his contributions, but he doesn't make my top 10.
Yeah, I think there's definitely evidence and reasoning for him to be on it. I mean, looking at him from after Hunter Hearst Helmsley, like starting like pretty much Attitude Era, even like New Generation Era onwards, he's always been like a good hand to do literally anything. Play the face, play the heel, be the top guy, even sometimes putting mid-card guys over. He was always consistent, but I think there are a few better options that could go over him. Because thinking of the common audience, like a lot of these names, yeah, some of them are known to the common audience, and that would fit Triple H into that bill. Go up to some random person on the street, might not know who Triple H is, and that's something I would factor into this list of greatest like superstars, like these globally known people. So yeah, I think there are better options.
And I thank you for the assessment. I think these are all great things. So I think we're in consensus that Triple H probably doesn't make a top 10. So we're going to put a pin in that. But here's a question I have, because I'm looking back at, or trying to look back at his career, thinking about who he's worked with, some of his better programs. And is it that Triple H was great, or was always had the opportunity to work with great talent? I mean, Shawn Michaels is arguably one of the best in-ring performers to ever grace the ring, and a great talker, just great at I mean, he's just great, right? And so being in DX with Shawn, I mean, he's able to do the silly things with Shawn. He's able to do, you know, the heel stuff with Shawn. But is that more Shawn's greatness rubbing off on Triple H and making him look good? Like, I'm looking back at, even you mentioned, Brian, the Authority, or Cyril, I think, mentioned the Authority. I mean, these are not moments when he was himself by himself. Looking back at his singles programming, how much of that was the people that he worked with, the feud with Cena, the feud with Orton. We've got great in-ring performers who do the thing, you know. Is it Triple H that's making everyone else look better, or everyone else making him look better? So I think it's a great argument to take him out of our top 10. So he's out. Is there anyone else that we want to look at to remove from the top 10?
I would make the argument for Andre. Now, hear me out. When I think of Andre, pretty much 90% of the time, the first thing I think of is Andre versus Hogan. It's hard for me to picture, and yeah, I was born in the 2000s. I wasn't there. It's hard for me to picture memories that I've seen through like past film of Andre with anyone else but Hogan. So kind of the same thing with Triple H. I feel like Hogan elevated Andre as much as Andre elevated Hogan, but Hogan had a lot more like memorable feuds, in my opinion. Whereas Andre, it's Hogan, and yeah, there was like Jake the Snake. Yeah, there was Savage, but I don't know if he belongs on this list because he's so connected to Hulk Hogan.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing with Andre, and this is something that I was thinking about when I was making my list, is I was trying to, because I thought it had to only be WWE guys, I I tried to think of just what their career in the WWE was, right? So,
Sure.
like, I mean, there were people who came into the company in the nadir of their career, but I wasn't, Harley Race is a good example, right? Harley Race, one of the great wrestlers of all time, didn't have a terrific WWE career, though, despite being King of the Ring. And I feel sort of the same way about Andre. I mean, I to Brian's point, I mean, most of what you see of him in WWE is when he is a shell of the person that he was in the 1970s, when he was, I mean, Andre in the 1970s is pretty damn incredible to watch, because a dude that big shouldn't be able to do the things that Andre is doing.
Right.
But you fast forward to like 1985 and 1986, and yeah, I mean, Andre's his body is broken. Like you're watching a man's body reject him because of this disease that he has that he can't control. And so, I mean, all the matches that you think of that are, sort of the highlights of his WWE career, he's being heavily protected. Like, the people in the ring with Andre are having to make sure that Andre doesn't look bad, because he can't do the things he wants to do anymore by no fault of his own. So yeah, I mean, I understand the logic of getting rid of Andre. Not because he isn't a great wrestler, but I mean, depending on how you want to look at this list, I think the mythology of Andre is probably greater than the reality of Andre.
I think it's especially the case for the times when we have a lot of him on, film. At one time when there were territories all over the country, the best way to draw a house was
the way to draw. Yeah.
Yeah. Bring in Andre, put him in a battle royal, and that's gonna sell out your arena.
Yeah.
And I think that's when kind of the legend of Andre really grew. And he's if you're going to talk about big men in the history of wrestling, he's got to be near the top of that list. I think this is probably just more of a modern day bias and more of a bias towards once the territory started shutting down and once everything was on broadcast television, he wasn't as prominent. So when the business changed, and he was a big part of those early WrestleManias, and is a name that most people know. But I would agree with the rest of the panel that by the time most modern fans would know that would have seen him, his body had already broken down. He was not very mobile, and still a lot of great moments. But what was Hogan Andre WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3? Even then, he was. Everybody kind of realized that he was on the decline at that point.
I'm actually very surprised to see the removal of Andre. But he's so, and I get it, and I understand all the arguments, and I agree in a lot of ways. However, Brian, I think it was you who said that Hogan amplified and intensified the career of Andre more into the limelight, where I might argue the opposite, in that Andre, because of who he was and because of his size, you're not beating Andre, you're not going over Andre unless Andre will let you go over on him. So even in that match with Hogan, that body slam for the first time, that was Andre allowing Hulk Hogan to do that, because if he wanted to squash him in that match and just play stiff and no sell everything, I mean, he very well could have. Again, we've heard the stories. If you watch this documentary, which is a very fascinating documentary, there's two different ones. I think I watched the one on HBO, but you hear the stories of him just no selling guys in the ring, and because Andre's going to do what Andre wanted to do, and there's simply nothing you could do about it because he was huge. And so, it's interesting to not have him on the list, but the panel has spoken. So far we've removed Andre and Triple H. Is there anyone else that we removed from our list? I'm cautionary to throw out the name Bret the Hitman Hart, although if I was looking at this list of the top 10, I think I think there's possible that we could find a replacement, as much as it pains me to say it. I mean, a great technical wrestler, you know, the Hart Foundation and the feud with Shawn and the feud with Vince, you get all of these things. He's fantastic in ring, fantastic on the mic. But I don't know if I think top 10 that I put Bret Hart on there every time.
Well, I can't take him off because he's on my top 10.
I think it's hard to find a bad Bret Hart match.
That's
like that. That's the thing. Like there's, you know, name a wrestler who is, you know, wrestling during that area. He pulled a great series of matches out of Diesel. You know, everyone's best match was with Bret, and you know, as he was, you know, leaving WWF at the time. The Canada US thing was just golden, and you know there was the bizarre world of he got cheered, he got booed in America and then cheered everywhere else. Just, you know, nuclear heat, you know, at the time. And this might be I've already kind of laid the cards out on the table. And he's my favorite of all time. You know, one of the first storylines that I ever really believed was Bret versus Owen, and you know that family feud, and you know they you know, had a few great matches based on that. I think if he hadn't left when he did, the WrestleMania match that would have made Austin was going to be Austin going over Bret instead of Austin going over Michaels.
Probably.
Yeah, he had, at a time where the WWF was struggling to make top new stars. You know, Hogan was gone. You know, Randy was gone. Michaels, who knew what was going on in his life, you know, he stepped up and filled a gap that I think few could have really filled.
I will play devil's advocate for a moment and tell you, if you're looking for a bad Bret Hart match, the match he has against Skinner at Tuesday Night in Texas in 1991. I would argue, or maybe it's late 1990, early 1991. That is a horrible wrestling match. It is 8 minutes long, but if you watched it and I told you it was 8 hours long, you would believe it.
Okay, maybe hyperbole, but you know.
But that's more on Skinner than it is on.
So with that,
I would make the argument he does stay, because specifically coming out of the time with like the steroid trials specifically, you know, a lot of the larger guys, it was kind of awkward for them to stick around and be prominent in the product. So people like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels really carried, like, going into the new generation era onwards. And a lot of, like, what Cyril said, like, Bret Hart, like, he could play both roles. He could do literally whatever he was asked, pulling great matches, like, out of everyone. And yeah, if we're considering, like, everything even outside WWE, yeah, his WCW stuff after he left WWE was not phenomenal, and his career got cut short. But had that not happened, like, in the perfect world where Bret stayed in WWE, like, I feel like he would have even had so many more great moments, because he was just that good at literally everything he did as a wrestler.
It's fair. All right.
I'm going to throw out a name that I'm sure I'm going to lose this argument, especially when you see who I did include on the list.
So scared.
I had at number 11 John Cena.
Yeah, I can understand that.
And not for any reason that's, you know, kind of a knock on Cena. I think that he, you know, is an era-defining, you know, wrestler, and is probably more appreciated now than he was kind of at the time. And again, you know, someone who's, you know, total package, could talk, you know, could, you know, work his matches. He got a lot of criticism for not being a great worker, but I think that that's just kind of, you know, off base. I think that, you know, it was an interesting time because the business had changed. And I think it was a time where, like, his number of world title reigns is, you know, it was weird for me growing up to see, you know, nobody had double-digit title reigns instead of Ric Flair. That was, you know, why it was so, you know, iconic. I think there was a lot of belt passing around back and forth. the era where he just crushed everybody. When he became Super Cena and just killed the Nexus storyline by having to finish that Survivor Series match all on his own. I think he rightly got criticism for that. He was the one that kind of changed that finish at the end. He makes it just outside of my top 10. I'm sure I'm not going to win this argument. And again, when you see who I've got, when you see who I've included, you roll your eyes, and that's when the come on man is gonna.
Well, no. I mean, I can understand this, and well, I should start out by just saying there are only 4 people that are on this list that made mine. There are only 4 wrestlers that are on here that are on my top 10. But when I get to my top 10, I'll kind of explain to you why what my logic was behind how I chose things, which I think it's fair to say Chat GPT and I were using different metrics. But that being said, I mean, I can understand leaving Cena off. Look, Cena defines a certain generation in the company, and there are lots of very high quality matches that Cena was a part of during his heyday in the company, where I think Cena, what I think hurt Cena, and this is not really his fault, it's just sort of happenstance, is when Hogan was on top in the 80s, you were seeing maybe 2 hours total of WWE programming every week, some of which he was never on. He was playing almost more of a role that would be more akin to how they're using Roman Reigns right now, right? Where Roman doesn't have to be on television every week. You might go 2 or 3 weeks without seeing Roman. He's taking a vacation. It doesn't matter. When Roman comes back in, everybody knows Roman's the most important person there, and we all accept that. And Cena was having to do, at first 2-hour Raws, then 3-hour Raws, plus 2 hours of SmackDown. And then he was peppered into some auxiliary shows here and there as well. Velocity and, whatever might have been around. I think he made it on some of the ECW rebranded shows. God help us all. And, so when you have that oversaturation of seeing a talent over and over and over again, I think as a fan, it's hard not to feel like that person's not getting shoved down your throat. And it's not really the talent's fault. I mean, what are they supposed to do? This is what they're being asked to do by the company. But you saw more of John Cena in a month than you saw of Hulk Hogan in a year.
Sure.
If you weren't buying pay-per-views and doing that kind of thing. And so he's kind of a victim of circumstance in some ways. I'll throw that out there on his behalf, but he did not make my list.
It's 2 votes for John. Brian?
He made mine. And again, born in 2000s. When growing up, John Cena was the guy, so maybe a little bit of bias. But I think my actual argument is he made so much money in his time, in his WWE career, top merchandise seller. I think it was for consecutive years at one point. And not only that, but like Cyril mentioned, I feel like people don't respect how good of a worker he was. I feel like more people acknowledge it now. But he was doing whatever he was told, and he was put on at least decent matches with most people. Some of them not so great. But you think about matches with these guys who didn't have a ton of great matches. Like his match with Umaga at the Royal Rumble, I think was 2008 or 7. Umaga didn't have a ton of great matches, and John Cena pulled out an absolute banger. Then you look at John Cena's later career in 2016, his whole feud with AJ Styles. Dude, you're freaking amazing. You've been here for so long. And he's so consistent with what he did, in the ring. And he's also one of the best on the mics. And I feel like that's not talked about enough either. He's quick. He's witty. That's why he's in Hollywood right now. John Cena is someone who is a trademark of WWE, like 2005 onwards, top guy, and even now, where a lot of fans still want him to come back for one more, and he inevitably will. Yeah, he came back based off in theory that didn't set the world on fire, but people still want to see him because they respect what he's done, and he will always be remembered as one of the greatest of all time for most people you talk to.
Yeah, and I'm very torn. For the sake of the show, I want to remove him because I want to see who we add. But I also, like Brian, grew up where Cena was the guy on TV. And so it's really hard for me to look at a top 10 that doesn't include John Cena. Because as everyone said, what he's meant to the company and making, I mean, even his work against like his time with like his feud with Triple H and including Stephanie McMahon and Vince McMahon, just being funny, his time with The Rock in those two matches or one match or whatever it was, and just being able to go toe to toe with someone who some might say is one of the best on the mic in The Rock, being able to hold his own and still be that guy. So I have a hard time removing Cena from the top 10. So I think I'm going to vote for him to stay. So it's 2v2, and I suppose he has to stay simply because it's a tie. We don't have a majority. So are there any other arguments for anyone else on this list? So far, we've removed Triple H and Andre, which means we only get to add 2 more before we rank them. So does anyone want to make a last-second ploy to get anyone else off of the top 10 list? Are we okay with where we're at?
I mean, I can live with everybody else being on there. Again, depending on what system we're using to figure this out. But I think like Cyril, I used a much different system in my head to come up with like who should be on here and what am I actually thinking about when I'm thinking about who the greatest wrestler of all time is. But look, Hogan, not a great in-ring worker. It just isn't. But I understand why he's there. I'm not gonna argue against the man. Like, he has a historical place in pro wrestling. I get it. So
Hogan almost didn't make my list.
I would keep Hogan off of my list simply for outside of in-ring stuff. He would not make my list. Also, not my favorite to watch in the ring. Another thing I always find shocking is how tall people really are.
Yeah.
Like, I know, like, thinking about wrestlers, like, yeah, we know they're big people, but Terry is 6'10". Like,
yeah,
he should be playing in the, like, he's an NBA player, like a center power forward in the NBA. And it's just, doing things that someone that size probably shouldn't do. And he didn't do them always very well, but he did them. So it's very shocking.
Though he claims now that he's like 6'7", that his spine compressed from dropping the leg so much.
Honestly, with all of his back surgeries, I believe he probably is shorter now than he was before. He, he messed himself up. One of the things, and I think this is also, you bring up the NBA, I think this is also kind of true for NBA guys, is like, of course, they're all, or most of them at least, are massive human beings, just giant people. But because you only ever see them in comparison to other massive human beings that they are standing next to,
very true.
They're always like, well, how tall could Tim Duncan really be?
Right.
He doesn't look that big. It's like, well, yeah, but he's standing next to someone who's also 6'8". Yeah. You're not 6'8". He's gonna dwarf you when you
haven't sniffed 6'8" in your lifetime.
No,
you never will. Like, it's
you have to get out a ladder to be as tall as this man.
It's a good point.
So I think sometimes like we get a false impression when we're just watching it on TV. Like, if you go to a live event and see some of these folks live, like, it really is striking how big some of these human beings are. A friend of mine just went and saw a house show recently, and Omos was on the house show, and he was like, "Listen, you don't understand how big Omos is. Like, you think you know how big Omos is, and then you see that guy in person, and you're just like, son of a bitch."
Build it. What, 7'3", 7'4"?
I think he's 7'4", 7'5", yeah, something like that. He's a big dude.
Yeah, and I think when you look at some of the people like X-Pac or like Billy Gunn, Billy Gunn compared to a lot of the modern AEW rosters, he's a giant. Like he is.
Gunn is freakishly tall as well.
Guy.
Yeah.
But back during the Attitude Era, like, oh yeah, he's built. He's got some muscles, but he's probably just an average size guy. But compared to everybody else around, he is huge.
Well, but I mean, even it doesn't even have to be somebody that big, right? Like, I mean, you go back and look at how jacked up somebody like Ricky Steamboat was in the 1980s. All right, and they were acting like Ricky Steamboat was a lightweight back in like 1986 to 87, and that dude, I mean, if he was wrestling today, he'd damn near be a heavyweight. I mean, the guy he was gigantic. He was a huge man, but he didn't look like a huge guy when he's having to stand next to a 6'8" or 9" Hulk Hogan, or One Man Gang or King Kong Bundy or whoever the hell. But I mean, so many of these guys. Rick Martel, huge dude. Tito Santana, very large man. I mean, you don't realize how big these guys are. Even somebody more recent. I mean, Scott Hall he was a big dude, and people act like Scott Hall was just this normal sized guy. No, I mean, Scott Hall. Look, there's a reason he worked as a bouncer. All right, you don't hire small bouncers. He was a large man.
Right. So, no other arguments against anyone here. We're keeping it as is. We're moving so far Triple H and Andre. All right. Well, without further ado, let's see who we're adding to the list, because we can't have a top 10 with only 8 people. So, I will let you all, whomever would like to begin, offer a name and see what sticks. And I think we should probably everyone mention a name they think should belong in the top 10, and then from those names we'll pick one and then do the same thing for the second person for the sake of time and trying to keep some semblance of order.
And we're just focused on WWE sort of career, right?
However, really, I don't really care, to be honest with you. You can offer whatever name you'd like. So
I'll throw out a name that I think that not a lot of people. He recently passed. If you study the history of wrestling in Japan, you can't get away with not saying his name, Antonio Inoki. He is probably somebody, and I wrestled with it because he was a wrestler and a promoter at the same time. But he, pretty much. Between him and Giant Baba, made the Japanese wrestling scene. He set the groundwork for a lot of the modern day MMA by bringing in people of different fighting styles and having sort of shoot style matches, and wanting to prove that wrestling is superior. He had that famously bad match with Muhammad Ali, where neither of them really wanted to do the job, so it ended up being a shoot, and it looked ugly. But Antonio Inoki was as big a star as Japan has ever created. And if he wanted to make a star, he did this with Hulk Hogan when he lost to him by countout. He did this with Vader when Vader beat him in 3 minutes, and the fans literally, started setting things on fire. Come in and, have Inoki lose to you. Like, that is, the level of his stardom that were like shocked the nation. So I'll throw that name out, just as a starter.
Yeah, when I agree with you. When I I think the last time we did the show, we did like Mount Rushmore wrestling,
We did.
right?
We did.
And one of the people on my Mount Rushmore wrestling wasn't actually Antonio Inoki, but it was Ricky Dozen, who trained Inoki and was sort of the precursor to the modern era of Japanese wrestling. But yeah, I mean, you know, Inoki is one of those people that I don't know as an American if I'll ever really be able to appreciate how huge of a star Inoki was. Just like there are a lot of luchadors in the history of Mexican wrestling that I feel like, I mean, I've read about them and I've seen their matches, you know, in YouTube clips or old VHS tapes and things like that. But I mean, do I really appreciate how big of a star they were? Probably not. I don't know that I can, because their stardom, when you're talking about somebody like Inoki, it's not just that he's a great wrestler. He was a cultural figure for them, right? I mean, you know, he's it's almost like Santa Claus or something, you know, like I mean, seriously, like it's hard to imagine how much he actually meant to the people of that country. And so yeah, I get where you're coming from. I left him off my list because, again, I thought it was just WWE guys. But if we're talking wrestling worldwide, then yeah, Inoki should probably be in there somewhere. I mean, I think there's a whole reordering of this list that could be argued as well.
Yeah.
But, like,
well, that's next. After we add the two, we'll reorder.
So my two picks along that vein, which I wouldn't mind, you know, if both of them were left off, were Inoki and El Santo, you know, to have the international representation there.
El Santo was another guy that I put on that.
Again, you can't talk about, you know, lucha culture and another guy who transcended the wrestling, you know, industry. And, you know, I think there was an El Santo cartoon, and, you know, he was a cultural figure.
Yeah, he was. And he was on my Mount Rushmore of wrestling. I understand the logic. I mean, so keeping it a little more domestic here, this isn't actually someone that's on my top 10. But if I was thinking of it more broadly, Dusty needs to be on here. You know, Dusty, look, you know, in the 1980s, outside of somebody like Flair, Hogan, there's really no one that's bigger than Dusty Rhodes. And I mean, I would argue to you that Dusty's probably the best talker that's ever lived in the business. I mean, no disrespect to, you know, The Rock or what have you, but I mean, Dusty could talk about anything or anyone, and he could take a guy who'd been jobbing for 9 weeks and build him up in a promo enough that you were like, hell yeah, I want to see this match. Yeah, you know, I can't wait to spend money to go see this. Maybe Barry Horowitz can beat this guy. You know, just whatever. Brooklyn Brawler, pick your favorite jobber of whatever era you want to use. But I would put Dusty in there. You know, that's the main person that I would say I look at on here and I go, Dusty should be here.
Sorry, 1 second. This is gonna be my computer. Everything just shut off. So I'm on my phone, and I should be back in seconds. So go ahead and continue whatever you're saying. Brian, your turn.
Yeah, sure. I had a few names I was like tossing around. And I think a name worth mentioning at least is Kurt Angle, because like he came in to WWE like from his debut onward. It was like this guy had been doing it for years on end. He was one of the best workers in his time, especially in the early 2000s. He was funny as hell with whatever he was given. even when in his time as a heel, he was cheered, like both with the whole WCW versus WWE thing, and even like 0506 when he was with WWE ECW. Like, this guy was always loved because he was so darn good. And we don't have to talk about his TNA stuff because we're only talking WWE, even though his TNA stuff also was pretty good for TNA at the time.
Yeah.
So I think Kurt Angle is definitely worth mentioning and maybe putting on the list, thinking about how much he did, how great he was at it in such a short span of time.
And I'll throw
on my list.
I'll throw it. He's on your list, Larry?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And I will throw one name just for the sake of doing it. Who again I think was transcendent, phenomenal in ring. Even though of course it's all whatever. His moments and the moments that were chosen, his spots were hilarious and fit the character so well. One of my favorites of all time, Eddie Guerrero. I'm throwing in we're talking. Cyril and Lowery. You mentioned El Santo. We're looking at mainstream to what WWE history is, and what type of kind of that luchador influence, but making it fun, cool, interesting to the masses. His theme song alone and the entrance in the car, there's just so much about it that just really I can't. I need this fan to come back when it's hot in here. That I can't leave him out of my list. I don't think that Rey Mysterio becomes Rey Mysterio, who he is in his legend now, without Eddie. I don't think he gets. There's no way that someone his size wins the World Heavyweight Championship if Eddie doesn't pass, unfortunately. So as Rey is one of my favorites of all time, we don't have Rey in his magnitude without Eddie. And so I have to put the name Eddie Guerrero out there. Just a great in-ring performer. His heel work. Videos of him, like the fake chair shots and all of those things show up on my Twitter feed all the time. And it is just so funny to watch every time. One of my favorites is the one that he gets caught and acts like he didn't get. It was just he's just fantastic, and I just love Eddie. So I got to throw the name Eddie out there, and we will debate all the names discussed as of right now. Whoever would like to deserves a spot in the top 10 for us.
So you got 2 spots and 4 names.
2 spots, 4 names.
Or 5 names, technically.
5, yeah.
Yeah, I'll kind of take my 2 out of the running because we are kind of focusing on.
Would you like to enter another who would be more of?
Brock Lesnar.
Oh.
Very sort of, and another guy who I could see sort of leaving off because he left the industry, came back, became a part-timer. Had one of the best rookie years, of all time. Could be mentioned in the same breath as Kurt Angle in that regards. And now he kind of plays the role as like the final boss character, where
hilarious.
He's the guy that you have to overcome, or and he's like a name that. Like if you beat him, now I think that it's not so much, but there's some legitimacy.
I think, and he's still very protected. And his legacy is still very protected. That's that guy. I think what I enjoy about Brock Lesnar, because I actually hate the character. He drives me nuts because he's always winning and it's like unstoppable, and I hate that about him. But he is what Goldberg was supposed to be. Like Bill Goldberg was the guy. He was undefeated for forever, but he sucked in the ring. Like his in-ring work was terrible, which is why he didn't have the longevity and the popularity. It was like the shock and awe because he would come in and destroy. He'd hit you with a spear or he'd hit you with a jackhammer, and that was all he could do. And we see Brock Lesnar now. He'll hit an F5 or 7 in the ring, and the match is over. But you look at young Brock Lesnar when he was a bit smaller and he's the shooting star press, even though he almost killed himself doing it. He has the agility, he has the charisma, even though he had never had it in previous iterations, at least on the mic. He was never given the opportunity, but it's so interesting and fun to see this new side of Brock coming out, where he's on the mic and he's having a good time. The match with Roman, where he comes in, and I don't think it was even his match, but when he comes in and disturbs the match with the forklift and lifts the freaking stage, or the big crane and lifts the stage. I mean, these things that he's doing in this current iteration without Paul Heyman. He hid behind Paul, or WWE hid him behind Paul for so long, and he gets abandoned by Paul, who goes and switches to Roman and takes over, which is interesting because Roman, I guess it makes sense from previous iteration of Roman, who wasn't good on the mic, but he's great on the mic now. So it's just the maturity that we're seeing and in the development of Brock Lesnar, I can appreciate. So I can certainly understand having him in the conversation.
I think I would also add on to that. In my opinion, Brock Lesnar might be one of the best sellers of all time.
Yes.
When you look at his matches,
do it. Yes.
Yeah, like when you look at his matches, particularly like the last decade, with because he had that streak of matches with smaller guys like Daniel Bryan, AJ Styles, Finn Balor. Dude was like throwing himself around the ring, and I remember his match with Daniel Bryan at Survivor Series specifically. Legit thought Daniel Bryan was going to win at several points because Brock Lesnar was that good at selling and telling a story in the ring. One of the best, definitely in the top 5 best sellers of all time for me.
Yeah, when he wants to work, he'll work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember the match, the no holds barred match with Rey Mysterio, where Dominic came and they did the tandem frog splash. That was one. Everyone knew Rey was losing that match, but again, for that one brief second when they did the double cover, Brock made you believe.
Yeah, I mean, Brock. I think Brock's the sort of knock against Brock is that he has to be motivated to want to do it, and he's not always consistently motivated, right? There are nights when he comes out and he's like, "Hell yeah, I want to work tonight. I want this to go really well." And then there are other nights where it feels like he just isn't down for doing anything. The match he had against John Moxley at WrestleMania, the sort of street fight they were supposed to have. It's not a good match, and it's not a good match because, at least if John Moxley is to be believed anyway, it's not a good match because every idea that he brought to him was turned down. Brock wasn't having it for whatever reason. But yeah, I agree. He's had great matches, and I think the Goldberg comparison is, that's pretty apropos. If Goldberg had a whiff of talent in his body, this is what he would have become. But that's a big untalented son of a bitch. Goldberg, I am happy that he's in wrestling, if for only 2 things. One, the match he had on Nitro with Steven Regal, where Regal just decided he was not going to have a 30-second match. He was like, "No, I'm going to make you work tonight. I'm going to sweat you." And Goldberg didn't think someone could do that to him because he's giant. And it turns out Steven Regal, pretty strong, pretty tough dude. You should not mess with him. So he just took him to school on live television and was like, "No, we're doing this for 10 minutes. Get ready." And it's wonderful. It's awkward, but it's wonderful to watch. And then there was an argument he got into backstage with Chris Jericho in WWE. Yeah. Jericho wanted him to do something in the ring, and Goldberg was saying, "I'm not going to do it because you're a little guy, and it wouldn't look right for me to sell for you that way." And Jericho's insult to him was, "I could make you look like $1 million in the ring, or I could make you look like a piece of shit in the ring, and you're so stupid you wouldn't know the difference." And that's one of the great insults in wrestling history, and I'm happy he was there just so that someone could say that to him.
That is absolutely hilarious. And because we were talking about it earlier, I think it's very interesting. I just looked it up because I was curious. We're talking about the massive size of these individuals, and Bill Goldberg is, I mean, looks wise alone is a giant, but he's only, and I say only, not that I'm anywhere close, but he's only 6'4" max. So it's interesting just to see that he could be built in such a fashion when he's not a true giant in the ring, or even close to, he's a starting shooting guard in the NBA, not so much a power forward.
It was presentation, because he's only got, when you see them standing side by side, he only has a couple of inches on Austin. They're close to the same size.
And Jericho the same way. Lowery brought up Jericho. Jericho's 6 feet tall, so you're not that far away, but
But Jericho was billed as a lightweight,
right,
cruiserweight for the better portion of his career.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've got some names. We've got 2 spots. Who goes?
It's almost impossible for me to pick between Angle and Guerrero. I mean, to me, that's 1A and 1B. Like they're both incredible in the ring. They both make a huge impact. You could flip a coin and tell me which one you want in there, and I'd say, yeah, okay, that works. They both deserve to go.
I would 100% agree with that. I'm wrestling in my mind and having a hard time saying which one would be on top of the other.
I'd agree with that too. They're both great in their own ways. They both trailblazed, specifically Eddie, for the Latino community. You look at his win against Brock Lesnar, No Way Out 2004, and the way the crowd reacts, and there's a Mexican flag up. That's one of the biggest reactions in WWE history, and it just goes to show how much that guy was loved and how much people respected him.
Yeah. And maybe that's actually a great argument for one of the reasons he needs to be on here is simply, whole lot of caucasity on this list. So, I'm just saying.
Well, it is WWE history right now. There's not too many of the non-Caucasian breed species, if you will, that would take the credit, mainly because Brock Lesnar shows up and destroys the black champion in 30 seconds. But that's a conversation for that. Maybe that's my argument for not putting him on the list. Ending Kofi Mania, Big E. This is maybe a slight against him, but that's not his fault. So no fault of his own.
That's not his fault. That would be a reason to kick Hogan off, but Hogan would sign up for that job. I would be okay with either or both of Kurt and Eddie to be on the list. Dusty Rhodes is also a tough one to pass up. He's Terry Funk almost made my list.
Terry's
Dusty's that era of wrestlers that just kind of made the industry. He was one of the main foils to Ric Flair when he was Dusty was the everyman, Ric Flair was the limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing son of a gun. Some of the greatest promos of all time, some of the greatest angles of all time. When he said to Ole Anderson, "It'll never be over," with the picture of the blood just streaming down his face. For a non-WWE focused, kind of modern era biased list, I think he would definitely be worthy of an inclusion.
He's also the guy that gets Paul Heyman into pro wrestling. He gave Paul Heyman his first job. Yeah, Paul was Paul snuck in. He had been a photographer, a wrestling photographer before that. But he snuck backstage at some NWA event when Dusty was Booker and tried to sneak into their writing room, to watch them produce the show. And Dusty pulled him out and was like, "Who are you?" And he told him, I'm just, I just love this business and I really want to be a part of it. And, please don't kick me out. I just was interested in seeing how it was all done. And he gave him Paul Heyman promo. I mean, he sold him the way that Paul Heyman does, and Dusty apparently said to him, the setup for the line was something like, you're so brilliant, Dusty, and I wanted to learn from the best, so I wanted to come and learn from you. And Dusty supposedly said to him, "Well, kid, it's a good thing for you that I'm a goddamn super genius. Now get your ass in there." And I was just like, that's a great line, and only Dusty can say that and get away with it. But yeah,
the impression, by the way, I'm very impressed with.
Spot on.
Impressed with my Dusty? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was a good one.
Everybody does a Dusty.
All right, Brian.
I will say, to add on to the Dusty argument for him, he's also responsible for a lot of the early NXT guys.
Yeah.
When NXT became like a weekly show, particularly guys like Roman, who didn't come from a wrestling background, made Roman into the guy he is today, and even helped shape guys like Seth Rollins into the WWE mold, and Alexa Bliss, and like so many other names who are nowadays, like, they're the top names of the business. And you see a lot of other guys that are in training in NXT today in the last few years, not as great. Maybe it was the Dusty influence. But with the names we have, Dusty, Eddie, Angle, it's tough. Personally, again, born in the 2000s, I got to give it to Angle and Guerrero. I'm just not that familiar with a lot of Dusty's work, particularly before WWE.
I'm going to send you some promos.
Go for it.
All right. Well, so I think we're all in agreement for right now that Eddie belongs on the list. Is that safe to say?
Yeah.
Okay, Eddie's making the cut. So with the final spot, it sounds like it's coming between Angle and Dusty. And Brian, for recency bias purposes, we don't get the American Nightmare version of Cody now without having had Dusty at some point. So I'm going to throw Dusty Rhodes in there in the top 10. So here is our top 10 as presently constructed, and we will move things around and we'll see if we can come up with an episode. Gentlemen, we are at an hour, and I didn't expect to go much longer than that. So we will table the female episode for another day. But we'll end with our top 10 and getting our top 10 in order. So with these names, we have Hulk Hogan, Steve Austin, The Rock, Ric Flair, John Cena, Shawn Michaels, Eddie Guerrero, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, and Dusty Rhodes. Before we go there, question, we didn't remove him earlier. Brian, he's on your list. Lowery, he's on your list. Do we take John Cena out of our top 10 for Kurt Angle? Are you willing to make that judgment? That's a tough call, and I will leave that up to the panel.
I mean, so here's the thing, I have my top 10 seen here, but my top 10, was made a much different way. It looked much more at in-ring work and, how many what I would consider to be fantastic matches the person had, that sort of thing. And that's not really what this list that I'm looking at here is. This is about impact on the business. This is about popularity. It's about time spent on top, things like that. So I mean, we had our conversation. I mean, I'm comfortable leaving Cena where he is. Like, it doesn't bother me, but because when I look at this list, I'm envisioning it in a different way than the list I made, or
I'd like to hear what Brian thinks, but I do have a counter proposal to that, which I think we'll get more agreements. Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Well, in my opinion, it's as simple as this. Kurt Angle was a better in-ring wrestler than John Cena, and I personally think John Cena did everything else a superstar does better. On the mic, I think overall Cena was funnier. He was a better overall superstar. He pandered to a lot of the audience, especially the younger audience. He was there a long time and he's still not done, even though it's part-time now. I just think he dominates every other category there is when comparing the two.
Sure.
My counter proposal, I don't love Hogan on this list. I would be completely fine, and I can't remember too many great Hogan matches. I remember a lot of great Hogan moments.
Moments versus matches is an interesting.
He's a great entertainer and knows how to work a crowd. He's also a backstage politician who lobbied to put himself on top. He was also involved in some of the worst matches I've ever seen. Yappa Pie strap match and the whatever stuff he was going through with the Dungeons of Doom. Undoubtedly, one of the most influential, between Hulkamania, the NWO. But I would be perfectly happy to toss him off in favor of Kurt Angle.
I'm in support.
I mean, I'm fine doing whatever you guys want to do. I look at the list and say, well, I mean, Hogan deserves to be there because there are a lot of guys on this list. Well, I won't say a lot. I'd say the top, 3 of the top 4 positions are guys who are not among the greatest wrestlers that have ever lived, at least in terms of in-ring work. That's just not, that's not why they're on this list. They're on this list because they do all the other things about wrestling really well. They sell you on wanting to watch the program. They, they're charismatic. They have great psychology, those sorts of things. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I'm not in the business of defending Hulk Hogan. I got better things to do with my life than defend Terry. Although I do think, if you've never read the transcript for his Gawker trial, it's worth it. It's so worth it. Because the man makes the legal argument that when he went on shows like Howard Stern and talked about the size of his penis and how large it was, he was talking about Hulk Hogan's penis and not Terry Bollea's, and that they actually have 2 completely different size penises. And there's a whole conversation about this. Like, this is a whole legal argument that they're basing their case around. And if for nothing else, that's fantastic. But yeah, I mean, I understand getting Hogan off the list, and he is a moral pariah for his his commentaries.
I will say that Hulk Hogan's done a lot of good for the business, but he's also done a lot of bad. And I don't think you can say that about a lot of other people in this list. They've done a lot more good than bad, whereas Hulk Hogan, it's almost a 50-50, if not weighing one way. So I'm also comfortable removing him from the list.
It's not just because the 3 of us are black. I mean, it definitely has something to do with it, but it's definitely not the only.
But so everybody else on the list, I would be happy to see, show up on the show now.
Yes.
Hogan doesn't, Hogan could disappear for all I'm concerned.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually had a running bet with a friend after he made those comments that he would never appear on television again, and I lost $20 because of him. So for no other reason than that, Hulk Hogan can go fuck himself. It drove me $20.
Fan-freaking-tastic. All right, so top 10 best male wrestlers of all time. Here's our list, and the final thing we'll do is see if we can, in some semblance of a decent amount of time, I suppose, organize this top 10 list in a better way than we have it now. So here's the list as presently constructed. We have Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, The Rock, Ric Flair, John Cena, Shawn Michaels, Eddie Guerrero, Bret Hart, The Undertaker, and Dusty Rhodes. Should we start at 10 and work our way up? I think it's probably slightly easier to work with that way. So let's go there. At 10 from that list, what do we got?
That list, I would probably, and I've kind of tipped my hand at this earlier. I would probably put Cena at number 10 on that
Well,
list.
Cena's not on the list anymore, though, right? Didn't we? Oh no, we left Cena off. You're
Hogan
right.
Cena on,
left
yeah.
Cena.
We took Hogan off and left Cena on. You're right. You're right. Yeah, I would agree with that. Cena at 10.
Works for me. That was easy. Ryan, you okay with that one?
Sure.
He's showing his age a bit here. Oops. All right. So at 9, where do we go at number 9?
You said Dusty was still on the list, yeah?
Yes.
Dusty is still on the list. Yeah.
I definitely think Dusty's somewhere lower compared to a lot of these guys. Particularly talking about WWE and like the owned properties. I think Dusty's on the lower side, maybe even 9.
I would be comfortable at like a 9 or an 8 for Dusty. I mean, I'm okay with that. I understand the logic.
So right
Yeah, I
over
can do
here,
that.
9.
I
All
can
right,
go with 9, yep.
Dusty's in at 9. All right. So at 8, where do we go? Number 8. I wish you could see my. Hold on. Let me see if I can.
What do we think about The Rock at 8?
Oh,
Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm struggling with exactly where some of these guys go. I mean, if we're talking about like in-ring work and stuff, then yeah, I mean, you know, The Rock and Austin, they need to be lower on the list. But you know, I mean, they're iconoclastic wrestlers. I don't know. I mean, between the two of them, Austin is the better worker for me than The Rock. In fact, if he hadn't had his neck injury, I think he would have continued to be a better worker than he turned out to be in the second half of his career. But you know, he really had to change his entire style after
that's very true.
After that neck injury. You go watch Steve work, whole different dude.
Yeah, I think thinking about like the overall superstardom of it, I cannot see either Austin or The Rock being at 8. I was going to suggest Eddie, as much as I love Eddie so much. He wasn't at the level of superstardom, not even close to someone like Stone Cold Steve Austin. Eddie's great worker, so funny. His stuff with China, like my dad had VHS tapes and I saw a lot of his China stuff. Funniest shit ever. But I think he had this pinpoint of like early 2000, like 2004, where it was like, oh my God, Eddie Guerrero's like the greatest thing that's ever happened to wrestling. And before that, Eddie Guerrero's still great, but he wasn't phenomenal.
Well, I don't think he was being put in the position that he was by the WWE at that point, right?
Sure.
I mean, some of the matches that he had in the cruiserweight division in WCW are among the best matches I've ever seen anyone have. But I mean, he was curtain jerking, right? Like, I mean, that's how they saw him, was like, you might be one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. We just need someone to go out there and open the show so that we can do a, you know, Dungeon of Doom angle soon. So if you'll go out there and just have a 5-star match for us, you know, we're busy getting Ed Leslie here ready to go out there and wrestle Hogan. So
well, and I do think that two things prevented his ultimate stardom, of which I would believe would become. Number one being that he's a Latino artist or a Latino wrestler, in which case, at that time, at the very least, were not pushed as the top guy. Very, very much to this day, still are not often as the top guy. Recognize their incredible work. I mean, I think, you know, Santos Escobar is on his way to some level of stardom.
Hope so.
And the current iteration of the LWO is fantastic, and I love the representation. Let's hope and pray we don't get another Primo and Epico and whatever the little little Torito guy was running around, or we end up with the Mexicools, or any one of those very interesting representations of Latino wrestlers. But I think at this day and age, Eddie would have been a super duper star because of his work. But number two, his unfortunate passing as early as he was in his career. He'd already had so much time in, but his ceiling was so high. If he could have, lived another 10, 15 years, what would his in-ring work looked like? It would have been interesting to see longevity-wise. So I think for longevity purposes alone, I would be comfortable putting Eddie at 8, even though he's one of my favorites and in my tops. I think that the others on this list, and only because he lived as long as he did, his career was cut short. But everyone else had much longer time and is still around.
To that point, by the way, I hope great things for Santos Escobar as well. I mean, when I saw him in NXT, I was like, oh, this dude's he's a star. I mean, like, somebody strap a belt on him because we need to shoot him to the moon.
Right.
Do you realize how old Santos Escobar is right now?
I do not.
He is 39 years old.
Wow.
So, I mean, like, I hope great things for him, but also, like, the clock is ticking, my man. Like,
Sure.
we need to get you. Now, granted, 40 doesn't mean what it used to in wrestling, but, like, I mean, you're on the back nine of a career right now. You're not, like, we gotta take advantage of you while we can, and we don't have a whole lot of time left.
And Eddie was 38. Speaking of, Eddie was 38 when he passed. So
yeah, but I mean, Eddie, they'd already made Eddie a star. He'd been a star for a few years by the time he passed, and so it's like they were already taking advantage of him.
Right.
Like they haven't even begun to take advantage of Santos yet. So,
Very much so.
Anyway, to that point, so if Eddie becomes number 8, then I think you can make basically the same argument for not the same argument, but a close argument for Kurt, that he has a relatively short shelf life in the WWE compared to some of these other guys.
Very true.
In wrestling in general compared to some of these other guys. So as amazing as he is, and as quickly as he shot up to the top of the company, I mean, he doesn't have the body of work attached to him that someone like a Ric Flair has, or a Shawn Michaels, or what have you. Like, he just didn't. His body didn't give him that kind of time.
Agree. So in that case, I preference-wise would put Eddie over Kurt at 7 and put Kurt down to 8. That's my preference, however.
I can live with that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a coin flip to me.
Absolutely. So let's go Eddie at 7, Kurt at 8. So far, we got Cena at 10, Dusty at 9, Kurt at 8, Eddie at 7. So now we're looking at 6. So we have Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, The Rock, Ric Flair, Bret Hart, and Steve Austin for the top 6 spots here.
I mean, I would be inclined to put, of those people, I would be inclined to put The Rock at 6. That's just for me personally. Like, I mean, the other folks on this list are just at such an incredible level that, it's hard for me to justify knocking any one of those remaining folks off to put him any higher.
I think I can agree with that, because I think a lot of people think of The Rock and think of him as this illustrious superstar, which he is. But I think people overlook he wasn't a fully active superstar for very long. I think he debuted, correct me if I'm wrong, 96, and left for Hollywood in 02. So,
02,
yeah. So not a long time. He had like amazing moments. He will always be one of the most recognizable superstars of all time, and probably one of, if not the best person on the mic. But his in-ring work wasn't amazing. Granted, the standard was lower at the time for mainstream WWE. But I would be comfortable also putting him at 6.
Well, and keep in mind that it takes a good 2 years for him to find himself in that too.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, the blue chipper gimmick, the Rocky Maivia gimmick.
In 95, yeah.
No,
Or Survivor Series.
Survivor Series.
96, 97.
96.
Yeah.
Almost killed his career.
I mean, nobody wanted that. Nobody's wanting that to go back to being what it was. And even, I mean, he was great in the Nation of Domination, but I mean, that's really a lot of other more seasoned wrestlers like Ron Simmons and Charles Wright and so forth, kind of grooming him and being like, listen, kid, like, just watch what we do and like follow along with us. We'll teach you in the car what you're supposed to be doing. And, I mean, like, I mean, Ron Simmons deserves a hell of a lot of credit for making The Rock who he is, like helping fine tune what was there. But yeah, I mean, like, if I told you get to watch nothing but Rock matches, but it's only going to be the first 2 years, like, that's not going to be a real exciting time for you.
Yeah, and I think some of the criticism of his work is is probably correct. Another kind of great seller, by the way.
Hilariously selling. No one sold the stunner like The Rock. I mean, to this day, my favorite compilation of stunners would be I don't know, Vincent Kennedy McMahon might take the cake for selling the stunner, and he sure as heck took a lot of them. So,
but for a lot of these guys, like The Rock, Austin, even Cena to an extent, probably less or so. By the time they're a superstar, the crowds aren't expecting them to put on technical clinics. They're there to see the hits be played. They're there to see The Rock out on people's elbow, and they're there to see Austin stomp a mud hole into somebody, and they do their stuff, and the crowd goes wild. That's he probably had the ability to do more, but at that point in his career, he didn't need to.
That's a good point.
So, I mean, I would make the argument that Flair probably needs to be 5 here, only because, this is a pretty heavy WWE heavy list, and ultimately a lot of what made Flair who he was doesn't happen in the WWE. I mean, he has a perfectly fine WWE career, has some very special moments in it, but if I was making a hit parade of Ric Flair for you, about 20% of that would come from the WWE, and the rest, I mean, and honestly, if I'm being really honest, I could break his entire WWE career down to 3 matches and then be like, everything else was fine. This is all you really need to see. If you see the 92 Rumble, if you see his WrestleMania 8 match against Randy Savage, and you see his retirement match against Shawn Michaels, that's it. Everything else is somewhere between fine and good. But like those are like the oh my god moments of his WWE run. But then if you talk about the NWA and you talk about WCW, I mean, I gotta have like 5 tapes worth of stuff to be like,
Yeah, all cards on the table. If we're considering the entire body of work, I had Flair at number 1.
If we're considering the entire body of work, I agree. He probably needs to be either 1 or 2. But I was just kind of trying to think of it in those terms.
But yeah, I'm fine with Flair at 5. I'd probably be fine in those terms, dropping him to 6 and putting The Rock at 5. But I would be okay with Flair at 5.
I'm also good with Flair at 5. I'm good.
Yeah.
I think the rest, just if we're looking specifically at WWE, simply mean too much. But Bret Hart notwithstanding,
I mean, at this point, it gets really tough, right? We're down to 4 people. I mean, for me, if I were making the rest of the list, I would go based on this list and the way that we're doing things. I would say it's probably Austin at 4, Sean at 3, Brett at 2, and Taker at 1. But that's me, you know. I could see arguments for some other order of them, but for me, I put Taker at 1 for a list like this, just because, I mean, all apologies to the Hulk Hogan, but I think that when you think of the WWE, the person who defines that company is Taker, not Hogan.
That's fair. It's a fair assessment. So Taker's also one of my top 5. So for me, if I was going from the top 4 of what we have with being Taker, Brett, Austin, Michaels, I agree. I would take Taker at 1, because again, we look at transcendent talent. Made a lot of money for the company, was just a phenomenal worker, so respected in the professional wrestling community, backstage, in the ring. He was just an important person. Mark Calloway became that important of a person. You know, you look at like the what do they call it? The court, wrestling court, you know, backstage, that kind of stuff. Like, you know, Taker was the guy that everyone looked up to and looked to, and was able to have all these matches with so many people. And so for me, Taker's 1. And then again, I think he might have even been on my Mount Rushmore. Michaels for me is at number 2, because he could do it all and did it all. And then from there, you know, Austin and Hart at 4. But that's me.
For me, I put Bret Hart at 4 confidently. I just think the other 3, I think it's Bret Hart. There's like a pretty decent gap to the next 3, in my opinion. Think about like overall superstardom and what they were to WWE as a whole. Then after that, it becomes a lot harder. For me personally, I have 3 Undertaker, 2 Shawn Michaels, but I could definitely flip those around. I have 1 as Stone Cold Steve Austin, because you talk to literally anyone who was watching wrestling in the 90s, most of the time their favorite wrestler was probably Stone Cold Steve Austin, or because he was the product. He was every person. A lot of the people watching were watching this badass dude fight the authority of his job. Everyone wanted to do that when they work at a job. They want to go against their boss. They want to do that. So a lot of people not only related to him in that aspect, he was also the good guy as being a badass, drinking beer at work. And yes, he's not the best worker, but he was pretty darn good. And again, at the time, they weren't expecting everyone to be like doing flippy stuff and being super ultra technical. So I think Steve Austin should be ultra respected. And I think I put him at the top simply for his superstardom transcends everyone on this list, with only a few coming close to that.
Yeah, I initially had Austin at 2 below Flair, so that, you know, by default that would bump him to number 1. I mean, you can't talk about WWE without talking about, you know, Austin and McMahon and their feud. You know, that was era defining. It was really like I said, a cultural, you know, moment. You know, how many, growing up, like I said, I was in middle school during the Attitude Era, and, you know, you saw Austin T-shirts everywhere that the teachers would make them turn inside out because, you know, you can't have those T-shirts on. I've been talked into Taker higher on the list. I had him at 4 initially, but I could definitely see him at 2. And then HBK at 3, and then Brett at 4. Brett, probably would have admitted that he had a lot of liabilities as the total package. He wasn't the best talker; he was passable. So I would have Austin and Taker, Michaels, even though I couldn't stand Shawn Michaels, and then Hitman as my top 4.
So I think there were 3 votes for Brett at 4. So Brett solidified in the top 4, and there's I mean, trying to come up with a top 3 with Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin, and The Undertaker has got to be one of the hardest things to do, because they are wrestling personified. They are WWE personified, and so it is very difficult to place the top 3. But we got to figure out some way. So I know Lowery and I had Undertaker at 1. Brian had Austin at 1. Cyril had Austin at 1. So that takes Shawn down to 3, because we've got 2 number 1 votes for Steve and Undertaker. So we got to find a way to separate there. So I suppose Michaels goes to 3. Which then we just got to figure out. We just got to buckle down and figure out who meant more, I guess, to the company.
If I may make the argument against The Undertaker,
You
late
may.
in his career, he wasn't phenomenal.
He was also 50 years old.
That is fair. When Stone Cold
And had
stopped,
been around
though,
for forever.
yeah, when Stone Cold stopped, though, he was still having like decent matches. But when he called it quits, yeah, he came back once very recently, and that was a lot of fun. Undertaker kept going, and yes, because WWE probably paid him. They did pay him a ton of money to do it. But you look at probably like once the streak ended onward, I don't know if any of Undertaker's matches were good. The only one I can think of that I would call good was his tag team match with Roman Reigns against Drew McIntyre and Shane McMahon. Everything else, it was hard to watch. Like, think about his match with Goldberg. That was scary to watch.
Well, because you were in the ring with Goldberg. With that
I mean, yeah, that's fair. That's more on Goldberg. But.
Yeah.
Well, it's because Goldberg got a concussion in like the first minute and a half of that match.
That's right.
Well,
So,
he like headbutted a door on the way out, and that's where he got the concussion from.
Something like that.
I can't remember if it was that or if he like hit a turnbuckle or something. But either way, I mean, like,
Yeah.
you're taking a guy who's, only marginally talented to begin with, and you're giving him a head injury, and then being like, okay, give me some gold. No, I mean, so my argument against Austin is the sort of white hot era of Austin that people think of, right? This Stone Cold era of Austin. It really lasts for 4 years, right? I mean, it's 1998 to 2001. That's Steve Austin in his prime as the Stone Cold character. So, everyone wants to remember it as like this incredibly long period, and I think that this happens a lot with the Attitude Era, is that people imagine it having been much longer than it really was, but it's just like blip in time, really. It's people just get it confused in their minds as being much having lasted much longer than it really did. Much the same way with like DX, right? If everyone thinks, oh, DX was amazing, they lasted so long. They lasted a year and a half, if
Wow.
that. That's it. Like, they start in 97, they end in 98. I mean, at least in its first generation, in its first iteration with
a trillion of them.
with Michaels, and then Michaels retires for however many years with his back, and I mean, they go on to do other cool things, but like, it seems like it was longer than it was because we see the clips over and over again. So, my thing with Taker is like, it's true that Taker's basically wasted as a performer from like 1990 to 1996, because you have him doing a gimmick where he doesn't have to have good matches. Name me a great match that The Undertaker has from 1990 to 1995. Oh, was it his feud with Kamala? Was that the cool one? Was that the great match? Was it his feud with Yokozuna? Were those great matches? I mean, like, he doesn't have one. But then starting in 96 with Mankind and going straight through to really, I would argue until close to the very end of his career. I mean, close to like the last 3 or 4 years there, where he was just. I mean, listen, he's active, but he's really only wrestling like 2 times a year.
WrestleMania, and one other time when he
Right. I mean, he's given you some pretty decent matches there, every time out. So like, I feel like longevity wise, he gets the nod for me, but.
Well, and
I can understand it either way.
And I would argue again, because Undertaker's one of my favorites. Undertaker belongs in the number 1 spot, longevity included, but also because he started in this gimmick. He's got some of the greatest moments: the rivalry with Kane, of course, the streak, his 2 matches with Shawn. You've got all of these feuds that he was in. You've got Mankind in the Hell in a Cell spot, which probably goes in the top 10 list of greatest spots to ever exist. In the history. Stone Cold I would argue, doesn't have a spot in the top 10 of spots in WWE history. He might, the milk truck was funny. That's a great moment. The fight in the grocery store with Booker T is hilarious. He really likes milk. He likes beer and milk, apparently, those 2 things. But you look at Steve Austin before Stone Cold, and you're not looking at his character necessarily as one of the most fantastic characters to ever exist. And we would argue that the Undertaker gimmick got very stale, but then also had a very successful run as the American Badass, a version of the Undertaker. He wasn't, tremendous necessarily. I mean, he won a championship, but he's not, so he had a gimmick change. The gimmick was successful, and then was able to do both for the rest of his career. And as the dead man coming back when his matches weren't necessarily as fantastic as they once were, puts on it. And I actually enjoyed his final match against AJ Styles, although it was a cinematic match. I actually enjoyed the match for what it was. And so longevity-wise, because he was able to navigate these 2 very successful gimmicks, whereas Austin was Stone Cold was where he made his name. Nobody's really checking for the ringmaster in their life and wanting the ringmaster to go watch those matches for Austin. So that's, again, my vote for Undertaker at 1.
You didn't like Stunning Steve Austin?
Stunning Steve Austin, the ringmaster. This is fine. But
listen, I mean, I'll make a case for Stunning Steve. I mean, like, Stunning Steve had some great matches with like his TV title reign, and has worked with the U.S. title. Also, though, I mean, the Hollywood Blondes, fantastic tag team. But I'll make one other case with regard to the Undertaker, which is Taker worked successfully as a baby and a heel within that persona. Once Steve Austin becomes Stone Cold, when he tries to turn heel, it fails miserably because the fans are just like, absolutely not. Right. No, we refuse. We will not boo you. Whereas Taker, although I'm sure he's equally well respected among the fans, they're like, yeah, it's fine. We can understand like getting behind you being both of these things.
I'm getting ready to move over to Taker, but I will, give Austin some compliments for his heel work. I
gotta take my
couple of really good spots.
Yep.
I thought the 2-man power trip was pretty good, where they had all the gold. They had the World Intercontinental and the Tag Team Championships, and they were him and Triple H were the people to beat. When they kind of the chair shots on Lita, like that was his effort to become this heinous heel that people would stop cheering. And then when he was like the paranoid Steve Austin, where he thought that everybody was getting ready to come after him. The reason I'm willing to drop him to the 2 slot is because he also gave us one of the worst things about modern wrestling, the what chance. What? And that is something that I don't think that we can forgive him for. So for the sake of making sure we don't go another hour on this, I'll capitulate and have Taker at 1 and Austin at 2.
I've been convinced the longevity argument. Once I thought about that Yeah, that got me. I'm okay with Undertaker at 1.
And health reasons, through no fault of his own, but yeah.
Right. His career probably would have been even longer and even more successful had the neck injury not happened, where he literally was unable to walk out of the ring, and there was questions about whether he would ever step foot in the ring ever again, period. And so, yeah, I mean, Undertaker had some injuries and he had to spend some time away, but he did it for so long. And there's nothing more iconic, I think, in WWE than the streak. And Taker's the guy for that, So here's our top 10. Painstakingly argued and discussed. Very, very great conversation about wrestling. I'm so glad that you all joined me for this episode. Our top 10 best male wrestlers of all time. Number 1, The Undertaker. Number 2, Stone Cold Steve Austin. Number 3, Shawn Michaels. Number 4, Bret Hart. Number 5, Ric Flair. Number 6, The Rock. Number 7, Eddie Guerrero. Number 8, Kurt Angle. And number 9, Dusty Rhodes. And rounding out our top 10, John Cena at number 10. Gentlemen, thank you for spending all of this time with me this evening, doing this fun thing. The next time, we are looking at the top 10 female wrestlers of all time. I'm going to give you a precursor to the episode now. I'm going to share the list with you so that you know when we come back what we're looking at. Here's our top 10. According to Chat GPT, here's our top 10 female wrestlers of all time. As I said, Mercedes Moné is no longer in WWE. That is her New Japan Pro Wrestling persona. She's making Chat GPT's list for whatever reason. Everyone else on this list is very WWE forward, although her time in WWE is Sasha Banks. Anyway, we'll spend the next 3 hours talking about this. So, top 10 best female wrestlers of all time, according to Chat GPT, and you'll have to figure out, or you have to watch the next episode when we are here to discuss this, but here's their top 10. Number 1, Trish Stratus. Number 2, The Fabulous Moolah. Number 3, Mercedes Moné. Number 4, Chyna. Number 5, Alundra Blaze. Number 6, Lita. Number 7, Becky Lynch. Number 8, Mae Young. Also, side note, very difficult to find young pictures of Mae Young. If you type Mae Young into Google, you will find all of the Mark Henry era of May, and it's very interesting. Number 9, Charlotte Flair, and number 10, Natalya. So that's your point of reference for the next episode that we'll get together to do. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Come On, Son. I'm excited for the next one. I can't wait, and we're gonna hopefully have some more people to come along for the ride. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching, for joining with us and spending our time discussing our top 10 best male wrestlers of all time. We'll see you soon for the female episode, where we will cover the list of top female wrestlers. This has been another episode of Come On, Son. Good night, everybody.